Hello, this is Mike Adams, and this is the Record Collectors Programme every Friday at 7:05 at a BBC local radio station near you. Join Chris Savory and Mike Adams this Friday for the Record Collectors at 7:05. Well, our special guest on the Record Collectors tonight happens to be somebody I've admired since I was middle-aged. Of course, I'm now 103 years old. So it's Big Jim Sullivan. Do you want to be called Jim or Big Jim?
You can call me what you like, Jim or Big Jim. I answer to anything nowadays.
I remember watching you, and sometimes you wore a fancy hat, and you used to stroll up and then just make the guitar magic on the World program of Tom Jones when he did live shows.
Yeah, that was a little spot that brought me really quite a lot of fans all over the world, you know, and especially in America, because the show was shown 2 or 3 times a week over there, you know, and people at first didn't think I could speak, because I didn't speak at all on the first, just with a guitar, you know, hitting it with a carrot or something like that, you know. And when I got over to America and I started speaking normally, you know, good Lord, you can talk. I said, well, yeah, of course I can talk. You know, I thought I was dumb. Quite incredible. How did you start off in this business? Oh dear. Well, basically, in the 50s, I was going around the skiffle cellar and the Two Eyes and places like that real early on. 56, I was 55, I was down the Two Eyes, 14 years old, you know, and seeing all guys like Rambling Jack Elliott, you know, and Sonny Terry, Brownie McGee, Diz Disley and all those guys, you know, doing their bit. And of course the skiffle era kind of crept in, and that overtook, because it wasn't the skiffle cellar originally, it was something else, and that overtook all of that, you know. And then of course rock and roll kind of really kind of came in, and the Two Eyes, which I used to go down and jam with Brian Bennett and Licorice and Joe Moretti and Tony Sheridan and all those guys, you know. Used to go down there and jam with them, you know. Vince saw me somewhere and said, "Do you want a job?" You know. Yeah, so I said, "Yeah, you know."
Was that the Vagabond? Was it the Vagabond?
It was something like that, yeah. But the ones that I did with Vince, I can't remember who else was in the band now. But I know it was just pre-Marty, because all of a sudden I found myself with Marty Wilde, you know, in the what is termed now the original Wildcats. You know, it wasn't, because there was a couple before that. But the Wildcats, you know, with Marty, we became a team for 2 or 3 years there. It was a good team, and it was very hot out on the road. You know, I mean, the Wildcats were a good band. You know, it was a good little band.
Well, I actually saw you play with the Wildcats, because where I lived by the coast, and every sort of every touring went through where I was. My parents were not into rock and roll at all, but I was able to get out thanks to an older cousin, and who was really into it. Yeah, I mean, he was into sort of Chuck Berry and Johnny Lewis and the early Elvis stuff, and through him managed to get to see
people.
It was
so new, wasn't it?
Yes.
You know, that was the great thing about it. I mean, what we found it was, you know, sometimes I always remember going over to do the Tivoli Gardens in Sweden. Yeah.
Yes.
Tivoli Gardens, big, huge, and I think it was Cy Laurie's band was on before us, and Diz Disley was with Cy playing, you know, his inimitable guitar, and when we went on with Marty, you know, and at the end of it, they all clapped. The whole audience went bang, 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 bang. We thought they didn't like us. we were going, Christ, we've flopped here, Mark. You know. Said no, we haven't. You know, they went down a storm.
Who was your influence? I mean, I remember myself, because I play 3 chords badly, but I remember buying a Burt Wheaton Teach Yourself the Guitar in a Day book, as I think a generation of us did. I mean, how did you start with the guitar?
I never got off on Bert, bless his heart. You know, my first introduction to guitar really was Hank Williams. Yeah. Very early 50s, 53. I used to go over to my sister's house, and she had all the Hank Williams and Hank Thompson, all the country guys, and of course she had Chet Atkins, you know, early Chet Atkins records, you know. Well, you know, Jesus, you know, how can you not like Chet Atkins, you know? And of course I used to go home and listen to the records and practice the records, and I think I was probably the first English guy in this country to play fingerstyle Chet Atkins stuff, you know. And of course when I joined Marty, I had all of that going, you know. And then of course when Eddie came along, Eddie Cochran, the Wildcats backed Eddie, you know, and we got on famously because that was Eddie's thing. Eddie was a real Chet Atkins.
Yes.
Man, you know.
What was the first record you actually recorded? I mean, where you actually played the guitar on?
It was a thing with a country and western group that I had called the Clay County Boys, and I've got the recording at home.
Is it valuable, that record? Do you know if it's valuable?
Oh, I shouldn't think so, because it was one of these. We did a lot of American bases, you know.
Oh, East Anglia, around there.
All around, all over the place. These American bases, and of course the Yanks loved us, you know. English guys playing country music, you know, like real Americans, you know. You know, consequently, we got lots of records given to us, you know. Listen to this, guys. You know, the first time I heard the Louvin Brothers was, you know.
Oh, yeah.
American guy come up to us and said, "Hey, listen to these guys," you know, and of course, yeah. I think the biggest influence in my career was the solo in Rock Around the Clock.
Yeah.
I think that solo was like when I first had that solo, and I'd been playing a little while then. I think, and that was what, 54.
Yeah. Well, yes, 54 originally, revived in 56, revived ever since.
Yeah. And I think that, and it's only just recently that I found out it wasn't Franny Beecher who played the solo.
Oh, who did then?
Tony, it's something like Tony Matola or Atola or something like that. And I tell you, the guy who can tell us is Dave, who plays sax with us. He's the one who told me. And I said, no, I don't believe that's Franny Beecher. No, it wasn't. And checked it up. And of course, this guy was with Haley before Franny Beecher. He did the Rock Around the Clock solo.
Yeah.
Okay. Walking down some stairs one night, fell over and broke his neck. Franny Beecher stepped in, and it's been the Franny Beecher solo ever since, you know.
Now, you played lead guitar. I don't know if it's a record, but you played lead guitar on, it says in the data, anyway, on over 1,000 hit records.
Mm-hmm.
We all have favourite records, but there must be some that gave you a lot of pleasure.
Oh, I think the ones that gave me the greatest pleasure were things like Hold Me and Together, you know, where Hold Me was Together were the first time a fuzz box had ever been used in this country, you know. And I always remember Keith Grant, who was the engineer at Olympic where we did it the first time. As soon as we'd finished the take, and we only did 2 takes of it, as soon as he finished the take, he said, "That's the best guitar sound I've ever heard him. I've never heard anything like this," you know. And it was like, oh, whoa, you know. And I suppose the other one, which is a big mark in the history of guitar sounds, is the Crying Game, you know.
With Dave Berry.
Yeah, with Dave, you know, that totally unknown at the time, you know, didn't know what we were doing, really, you know, just off the cuff. Oh, I've got a pedal here that I've been using I used it for a few years, 2 or 3 years before that. Used it on with Mike Cox on Sweet Little 16, and a few other records, if you listen to them, you know. So it was out and being used way before Dave Berry. I used it with Dave Berry, you know. And it's all seems to turn out, oh, that was the start of it, you know. That was the beginning of the wah-wah pedal, you know. It was nothing to do with the wah-wah pedal, really. All it was a tone control.
Did you have a favourite guitar? You know, your favourite?
Oh, yeah. I had a Gibson 345. When I joined Marty, he gave me a Gibson, an old Gibson Les Paul, a gold top Les Paul, 1954. It belonged to Sister Rosetta Tharpe. You know, I don't know whether you ever heard of her.
Oh, yes.
But she was a great gospel singer, and she used to play great guitar, you know. And she came over to England, obviously, and sold it, and it ended up in Marty's hands. Marty gave it to me, you know, and of course I gave it back to him when I got my 345 from Ivor Moran's, you know. Always remember going down to the shop, picking this beautiful red 345 stereo, in this wooden case, and coming out the shop, and I wanted to play it. I wanted to sit in the street and play it.
I always somehow imagine that you had a Gretsch as well, but you played a Gretsch once with Tom Jones. I thought.
Yeah, I had 38 guitars at one time.
Wow, that's a lot of guitars.
And after when for a person like myself, you get favorite guitars. You get guitars that you'll play forever.
Yes.
And it takes a lot to bypass these guitars. But if you ever do, they'll always have a fond memory for you. But they're sitting in their grave, and they're not doing anything. And the wood's warping, the wood's dying because it's not being played, and all this sort of thing. So eventually, I gave a whole bunch away. And sold a few that didn't really mean anything. The ones I gave away were the ones that meant most to me.
Are you amazed now? Because we're a collecting program, the record collectors. And by the way, if you've just tuned in, this is Mike Adams and Chris Savery on your favourite local BBC radio station. And the guest we're talking to, Mr. Guitar, Big Jim Sullivan, who is a genuine favourite of mine. And over 1,000 hit records, including, of course, Shout by that were on the guitar, Lulu. And Tom Jones, did you do it with Tom?
I did everything with Tom from when he first walked into the studio up until about 1975.
And did you know Joe Meek? I think you. Oh yeah. I mean, there's so many things about Joe Meek. Could be any anecdotes you can share. Without us getting sued from anybody.
I remember him being rather a temperamental gentleman. He was all right to us. Funny enough, I think with the Wildcats, and it was with the Wildcats that we did a lot of work with him. He seemed to have respect for us, and if he had respect for you, he never shouted at you or never called you names or anything like that. But I've heard, like from Richie Blackmore and people like that who'd worked for Joe, that he used to call them all sorts of names, But he never really had any nasties with us. Everything that we did was all very professional and very straightforward, and no real nasties,
Can we talk about Eddie Cochran? Because Eddie Cochran and the last tour, Brian Bennett, of course, was on it. Georgie Fame was on that tour. And, of course, you were, of course, worked with Eddie Cochran with the Wildcats. You were on that tour as well. Yeah. Any memories of that?
Oh, God. Remember sitting in the train with him, going somewhere or other. I can't remember where we were going because, to be honest, sitting with somebody like that, you just sit and watch them play. Just pick their brains. And everything they can do. If you can't do something, you say to him, "Hey, show us that. Give us, do that again for us."
Was Eddie sharing? Was he a person that would show you tricks?
Oh yeah, he showed us lots. Yeah, the very first thing I learnt off Eddie was a Chet Atkins version of "Birth of the Blues." With real nice chords in it. That climbs chromatically up the neck, which was kind of what I was learning from a Joe Pass book. You said about Burt Weedon.
Yes.
I never started on Burt Weedon book. I had a Joe Pass book, Mel Bay. Yeah.
And I mean, on that tour, which is to many people, apart from Bill Haley's visit when he arrived at Southampton, and Elvis when he popped very briefly into Scotland for a few hours. But that tour is probably, with Gene Vincent, seen as one of the most important rock pop tours ever to hit Britain.
Yeah.
Did you realise? I mean, so many of today's musicians and the musicians of the musicians, that tour said that was such an influence.
When you go to places like Chippenham, once a year to see the revival thing, the Eddie Cochran revival. It's fantastic to see the amount of people that go there, and they're all fans. They're all fans, and I walk through the hall sometimes, and I get recognised. Oh, there's Big Jim. Jim, how was it with Eddie? And what was he like? And so on and so forth, which you're bound to get. I think, and especially as he died over here as well, that kind of adds to the mystery of it, would you say? Because there's a lot of mystery on that tour. Everybody wants to know how he died, and how many bones were broken, and all of that sort of thing. And it's just one of those things. The only real story that I've got about that is that I'd made arrangements to come back with them in a car. And we were called off to do Sunday night at London Palladium, because they weren't coming back that night. They were coming back the next day. And I said, oh, well, I'll stay over as well. And, because I live near the airport. I was only a few minutes from the airport, And then all of a sudden we got called off because Marty had to do the Sunday night at London Palladium. Somebody fell ill on that, and we had to fill that in. And consequently, I that was the last I saw of Eddie.
I hear. I mean, I'm curious to hear from your own lips, but I gather Elvis Presley used to watch you on the Tom Jones show, and was a fan of yours. Is that true?
Yeah, he was. Yeah, old Elvis. Yeah, it was fantastic. In '69, we first of all went to Australia and did a couple of weeks in Australia with Tom. This is the opening of the real big tour, And then we went to Hawaii, and Tom said to us, "Who's coming tonight?" I said, "No," he said, "Elvis." I said, "Oh, Jesus," And I know what these little girls feel like, when they see a big star and they get that tingle. I got that tingle in my stomach, And I'm not gay or anything, And I kind of, the old hair stood up on the back of the neck, And my first thing is Scotty with him, Scotty Moore, They said no, but we're going to see Elvis after the show, and we're going to sit up with him and have a chat, and which we did. We sat up for 2.5 days, talking and playing and exchanging, our stories and our life, and all this sort of thing.
What kind of a person was Elvis then? Would you say?
Oh, yeah, that's a hard one. He must have been many different people to whoever met him, I mean, I should imagine that in the surrounding that we had, and sitting there face to face, sitting around like drinking and blinding and all the rest of it, nothing was kind of, nothing was sacred. Yeah. Stories weren't sacred. Females weren't sacred, music wasn't sacred, and the whole thing just kind of came out, from everybody. We all expounded our stories, and we sat around and played a bit of guitar, and he'd sing a song, and Tom would sing along with him, and they'd sing in harmony, and the whole thing, And after that night, there was Elvis always treated me with great, "Hi Jim, how you doing, man?" It was like an old pal. It was a bit like that. But as for knowing him, I couldn't say I knew him at all.
What did you think of his voice when you? I mean, we're in a little room now at the back of the theatre. What was his voice as we know it?
Yeah, fantastic, powerful voice. I don't think he quite had the power that Tom had. I think Tom is the greatest pop singer that's ever been on this planet. That's not out of loyalty or anything like that. But when you work with a guy and you work with, Jack Parnell's orchestra, you've got a 45, 50, 60 piece orchestra there, and Tom hasn't got a mic, and you can hear every word he sings over the orchestra. There's got to be something special about that.
What is your favourite Tom Jones record? From your point of view, not from Tom's point of view, but you think, I like the guitar work on that. I was pleased with that.
No, I tell you when I really enjoyed working with Tom the most, shall I?
Yeah.
We had to get out of the States every 6 months. We had to get out because we're touring tax the whole bit. So we had to get out of the States for at least 2 or 3 weeks. And we went on all sorts of things. We went down to the Gulf of Mexico in John Wayne's yacht. This particular time we went to Bermuda, and we ended up this one night in a nightclub, little place. Big place, big nightclub, in Bermuda. And of course, Kenny Clare, the drummer, was with us at the time, and John Rostel on bass. They were all with us, and myself. And they said, "Oh, Tom, come and sing a few songs." So I said to Tom, "Let's go and do some blues." He said, "Yeah, I love that." So we all got up there, and I started off, boom, and I tell you what, what came out of Tom was just unbelievable. You would have thought it was Howling Wolf. I mean, he note for note, word for word, lyric for lyric. He had the sound and the feel, and after that, he just tore the place apart.
Well, if you've got a favourite anecdote, and I mean, Rita, if I could talk to you, I mean, just genuinely talk to you all evening, what would be your favourite anecdote of sort of like at least 30 or more years in the business and the rest? If you had a favourite anecdote, or you find either amusing or tragic or magic or whatever. I mean, the trouble is you've done so much, Jim, but there must be something that's a favourite.
One of the exciting times of my life, shall I? And it's really simple. I was at EMI doing a session, had a tea break, and came out of the tea room, chatting to somebody, looking, and I bumped into somebody. Oh, what the? And there before me, between two great big guys, was Igor Stravinsky. And I'd actually bumped into Stravinsky. I'd actually touched him. Blew me apart.
Well, on behalf of all the listeners who I'm sure are very envious, I'm going to play a couple of tracks anyway. I always thought the PJ Proby records were fabulous, but I often wondered about Hull Meet Together Somewhere. I apologise if it was a secret meeting. But for me, meeting you is a true meeting of a hero. Big Jim Sullivan, thank you for being our guest on the Record Collectors.
You're very humble.